Eating bread, a Dvar Torah for Parashat Vayeshev. I am old enough to remember a time when eating bread was considered a legitimate act, and in memory of those days when gluten wasn't the source of all evil and celiac was only a collection of unintelligible syllables, I choose to dedicate this week's article to eating bread. This week we read about one of the darker moments in Israeli history, a moment when Bnei Yaakov throw their brother into a pit, a case the sages tell us will continue to haunt us thousands of years later. I will point out that although there are many points in the story that deserve a deeper look, it is the moment immediately after dropping Yosef into the pit, when the brothers sit down to eat bread, that I'd like to actually zoom in on. At first glance, this might be the most horrifying verse in the entire story. Not only do the brothers dispose of a sibling in such a manner they then choose to sit and eat as if nothing happened. This isn't something I came up with on my own. Rabbi Avraham ben Harambam says it comes to emphasize just how much they hated him, and Rabbi Ovadia Sforno says that they looked at Yosef as a rodef, someone who's trying to kill them, so getting rid of him was so obvious they felt no remorse, this being the very thing emphasized by telling us that they ate bread. Alternatively, there are those who claim that eating bread tried to deal with a technical difficulty. Later on, we'll learn how Reuven returns to the pit to discover to his surprise that Yosef is gone. What isn't clear is, why is Reuven surprised? Where was he when Yosef was sold? There are many ways of answering this question, but Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor gives the two most important ones to us, and both have to do with eating bread. First, he explains that shepherds don't eat at the same time, leaving the flock unattended. Which means that the fact that they sat down to eat explains that they had divided into two groups. The first group, which included Yehuda, decided that it would be better to sell Yosef than to leave him to die in the pit. But the second group, which included Reuven, didn't know this. A second possibility raised by the Bechir Shor is based on the Midrash that Reuven was fasting for Maaseh Bilha. In both cases, Reuven wouldn't have been sitting with his brother when they decided to sell Yosef, explaining why this meal is mentioned in the first place. My associative muscle, however, chose to work overtime this week looking for alternative uses of bread in Tanakh, beginning with a comparison. The next time the Torah tells us that the brothers ate bread will be when they are brought to Yosef's house after returning to buy food for the second time. This time the tables are turned and the brothers are those whose future isn't really clear, but it is interesting to note that it isn't only bread making a second appearance in the story. The brothers also bring Yosef an offering brought from Eretz Canaan, an offering including nechot, tzri, valot, 3 fragrant perfumes, that the only other time in the Bible where they appear together is during Yosef's sale. Ironically, it's also this point in which they sit down to eat bread that the Midrash points out that they unintentionally bring about a way of feeding bread to the entire world during the 7 years of famine. But on this associative journey, I discovered 3 more points about the role of eating bread in the Bible. The first, a description of the most basic needs of man, as can be seen at the beginning of Parashat Vayeshev, when Yaakov asks of Hashem only his basic needs, bread to eat and a garment to wear, or when as a result of eating the forbidden fruit, even the most basic need of man, eating bread, can be achieved only by hard work. Compared to our case, we can argue in favor of the brothers that they did not make a feast when they sold their brother, rather they only ate bread, or against them, that they took care of their own basic needs, eating bread, but they didn't take care of their brother's basic needs. A second function of eating bread is bringing people together, such as in the case of Yitro, when Aharon and the Zkanim sit to eat bread with Moshe's father-in-law before God, or the prophet from Bet El, who coaxes the prophet from Yehuda to eat bread. In both cases, the purpose of the meal is to bring people together. The brothers do the same, sitting down to eat bread together, but this only highlights the gap between them and the brother in the pit, who isn't invited. And the last role I think eating bread has is learned from the end of Parashat Vayeshev, from the meeting between Yaakov and Lavan near Gal-Ed. After the escape, the chase, and the encounter, Yaakov and Lavan form a covenant by erecting a monument and an oath. But, in my opinion, the covenant isn't sealed until after Yaakov calls his brothers and they come to eat bread. Eating bread is saying without words, I trust you to uphold your end of the deal. An example of this can also be seen in Tehillim. Even my familiar man whom I trusted, he who eats my bread, has lifted up his heel against me and betrayed me. According to this explanation, when the brothers sit down to eat, they are actually taking part in a ceremonial oath, saying this secret does not leave this circle. And Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor adds, although not here, that one of those who took the oath was Yosef himself, preferring to keep silent to the alternative. But this would lead us to a whole new discussion. Now, if I needed to end with some kind of conclusion, I'd say that even as early as biblical times, eating bread obviously led to unhealthy places, and I'm not saying this at all because my wife has celiac, but I'd probably be lying. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and forward it to a friend. I am Dovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.